Alrighty, and welcome to Renegade Performance Radio, or for those of you that are watching this on YouTube, Renegade Performance TV. Today, I've invited my close friend, Megan Signal. For those of you who don't know, Tokyo Olympics and Birmingham Commonwealth Games weightlifter, also 2 times CrossFit Games athlete. So the reason that I've invited Megan on today is to have a chat about training and her experience of how it is affected by your menstrual cycle. Females are becoming more and more aware of their bodies and performance. And it's a situation which I'm experiencing when working with female athletes where some days everything just clicks, and then other days they're on struggle street. And in all of my personal studies, this is a topic that I don't think was once covered, and I don't know why, but it just wasn't covered at all. It's something that I have very little personal experience on, and more and more research is being completed with the connection between athletes, their menstrual cycle, and how it affects the way that their body responds to training. So while I'm informed, I'm willing to learn a little bit more. And so that's why I wanted to get Megan on. So we can also just normalize the discussion about this inside the gym, because I don't think it is incredibly normal at the moment, particularly not in a relationship between male coaches and female athletes. It may be something that's spoken about a little bit more female to female, but there are a huge amount of male coaches out there that probably aren't having these conversations with their female athletes. And so that's a big focus for today's chat, but also just for female athletes out there. Maybe you're a little bit younger, maybe you're not aware of how your body responds. And so as a coach that works with a lot of female athletes, I just wanted to get some insight. So welcome, Megan, and thank you for jumping on.
Thank you for having me. And also just want to commend you for actually having this conversation, because like you said, it's not had very often. And male coaches and female coaches getting amongst it is pretty exciting for me.
Awesome. So Megan, talk to me. What was life like before you knew anything about, say, like hormones and how it affected your training? So you've been in the gym training now for 10 plus years. I'm sure you weren't really aware of it in the early days. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, pre diving into how my menstrual cycle even affected or had anything to do with my training, I, to be honest, just saw it as an inconvenience. I knew that when I got my period, I would get a little bit of bloating, a little bit of cramping, and I had no tracking or awareness around when I got it, when I didn't get it. And that was sort of how it was for me pre-training even. And my life in general, outside of just my menstrual cycle, was sort of just, I did a little bit of exercise here and there. I had no real awareness of what was going on within my body. I just kind of went about my day, working, bit of exercise, socializing, and nothing was aligned, nothing kind of associated with each other at all in any way.
Cool. And so was there an event that caused you to start to pay more attention to it, or what brought that awareness around for you that this wasn't necessarily normal or something wasn't right? Or talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah. So I got into exercise a little bit more in an extreme way, as you mentioned, working towards CrossFit Games campaigns. And to be honest, even through all of that extreme training, there was no real connection for me between my period and my menstrual cycle and my training. I just saw them as completely separate things. And it's at one point, and it was no coincidence actually, at one point I actually stopped getting my period, and no coincidence that it happened at the time where I experienced injury. So I did my ACL, went through surgery. Alongside of that, as I was recovering from that surgery, I had made the decision that I didn't want to go back to being the overweight person I was pre-training. So I started restricting my calories because I wasn't training, and I restricted them a significant amount. And on top of that, I was also going through a lot of stress of trying to get back to try and make a Commonwealth Games, which was the following year. So all of those things were happening at the same time, and it coincided with me losing my period. And I actually still didn't think anything of it, to be honest. I thought it was, again, just convenient that I wasn't getting my period. And it wasn't until I heard a conversation where another athlete was saying that she was getting some help. She had developed amenorrhea, which is what I just explained, the loss of your period. She developed amenorrhea and had connected that it was when she was trying to restrict her calories or cutting weight. And she was explaining that as a red flag, and her coach was there as well, and they were explaining it as a red flag. And I thought, oh, okay, maybe that is a red flag for me as well. So that sort of started the thinking. And then eventually I reached out and got some help, because months and months and months were going past and I hadn't got my period back. So that's when it starts leaning into a bit more of a concern. And then, I got some help, realised I had no education whatsoever, not on the menstrual cycle, like on my own menstrual cycle. The first question that was asked when I sat down with a professional was, when did you begin getting a regular period? And I kind of looked at her a little bit baffled and was like, no idea. And then so she started trying to help me figure out when my period went from being irregular, which is normal when you first get it at whatever age. It's irregular for a certain amount of time, and then you start getting it regularly. And I had no idea when that transition happened, because after a bit of conversation with her, I realized that I went on to contraception really early when I was still in that irregular stage. So as a fully grown adult, I couldn't even answer that one question. Yeah. How long was my cycle? How often did I get my period? And when was it regular? I had no idea. So that kind of put me in a really vulnerable state. I thought, man, I don't even know this stuff about myself.
I don't even know my own body. Yeah.
No, I was quite embarrassed, and I'm trying to be an athlete, and I'm trying to perform really well, and I can't even answer these basic questions. I was really embarrassed. So I think that kicked off a lot more of the thinking and wanting to learn. So that's how I got to that point, and that's how I realized it was an issue.
Awesome. And for athletes out there and coaches, what are the negative effects of losing your period? So you said that it was, for you, it was like a win. You were like, awesome, don't have to deal with this. But what are the long-term negative effects of missing your period on a regular basis like that?
Yeah, I think at a basic level, if you are healthy, a female should have a period. Yeah. I wouldn't even go as far as saying having a regular period, because having a regular period is great, but it's also very rare. If you talk to 20 different, which I actually did, our women's group that we have here at the gym, you talk to 20 different people and take a survey on how many have a regular period, there's not that many, for many different reasons. But having a period is a sign of, your body functioning correctly and you being able to sustain the normal ups, peaks and flows of different hormones within your body. If you do not have that, it suggests that there are, things happening within the body that are causing dysfunction. Yeah. And dysfunction being that you don't have peaks, you don't have spikes of estrogen and progesterone at different times, which means that you don't reach the point of menstruating. So that just is dysfunction. Yeah. If you do that for a long period of time, the symptoms that you can see come from that are, just stagnant energy or low energy. There are also for longer periods of time, and if this amenorrhea, if not having your period comes from an insufficient amount of fuel within your body, and that happens for a long period of time, then you start to see other issues happening. The likes of, yes, your energy is a lot lower. Your ability to sustain good bone density is is hindered as well. Your ability to build strength. And if you're not building strength, especially if you're an athlete, if you're not building strength and you're not increasing your muscle mass as your rate of training goes up, then you're at higher risk of injury. So there are a lot of things long term that can come up if you are not experiencing a period. But also I'd go one step back further and say, if you're not experiencing a regular period or even an irregular period, and it's coming from you not fueling your body enough, that's a whole story in itself that needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. And so from your understanding, how, and from your own personal experience, how does your menstrual cycle impact your training? What happens to your body at different times? Like, do you notice what happens to your performance? Does it affect the way that you feel, perform, just like from your personal experience?
Yeah, from my personal experience, I've done enough now, data collection, I guess you'd say, enough tracking to know that at the very start of my cycle, which is when you get your period, there are some common symptoms that I just have to manage because they affect my training. And those symptoms are some cramping. So cramping causes, obviously a discomfort in your lower abdominals, and even being able to stand up tall sometimes is difficult. So having to load and add power and speed and energy into that can be quite painful. So that affects my ability to perform. Another thing for me is I just feel like my mobility, like I feel like I'm retaining a lot more water, which is actually what happens at certain phases. And I just feel a little bit more inflamed. So my ability to kind of, get into deep squats in my knees and hips sometimes just feels a bit tighter. And that's just something I have to manage a little bit. Also, this is just something that I experienced myself, but I get quite scatty. Like I lose concentration a little bit. On certain days. So it's usually day 28. So that's the last day of my cycle, and day 1, which is the first day of my period. Those days in particular, I feel quite scatty and just a little bit all over the place. And so my ability to execute technically well sometimes goes out the window, or sometimes is hindered quite badly. Yeah. And so now that I know that, I can at least try to work with it, and maybe decide on the day whether or not I push through that, or if it's okay for me to kind of just, peg it back a little bit and keep the weights a little bit lighter and bring myself to a point where I get a quality training. So yeah, that's how it affects me mainly. There are other things too, but they're not always on every month. So I kind of just take it as it comes. Yeah.
And so with that being that everyone's different, do you have like sort of call it a protocol or something that you've kind of like a guiding light that you go, if I feel like this, then I need to pull it back? Or how do you approach the situation?
Yeah, I think that a great thing that you've just started that question with is knowing that everyone's different, because it is literally different from individual to individual. So yeah, for me, it is kind of, I guess maybe I have enough education on it as well, that I know that it's safe for me to push through certain things, and it's safe for me to, not ignore, but acknowledge and then continue on with my training anyway. Yeah. But I also have the ability and the confidence to pull back weights in certain times, and particularly around that scattiness. That's the main one for me, because I don't execute lifts well. It doesn't feel good. I don't enjoy that type of training, when it's just kind of like everything's all over the place and it's not quality, and I'm probably more at risk of doing something silly. So that's when I feel that way, I do pull it back weight wise. Also, when my body feels stiff and inflamed, it doesn't feel good pushing yourself into positions that, where your knees are sore and things like that. And it's just,
grinding through squats.
Yeah. So that's, in that situation in particular, I use pain as a guide, and I do that in all my training.
Yeah.
So when it comes to my period, I use pain as a guide. If I'm experiencing pain and discomfort, then, and it's not what I'm used to experiencing, with your regular training, then I'm more than happy to just say to whoever I need to say to, my coach or who's around me, that I'm going to peg it back. So those are really the protocols. What I have experienced, which is kind of interesting, is when it pops up in competition settings and you don't have that.
You don't have that luxury.
You don't. You don't, because you're like, I got to go. There's something, important that's weighing on this. So that was a really, really big learning for me, because that's where I learned that the psychology side of things is so important, because there's a lot physically happening within your body, but psychologically there is a lot happening as well. So if I'm just listening to the physical alarm bells going off and not listening to the psychological ones that are going off, I can work through all of that physical stuff, but the psychological side of it's probably going to do more damage to my performance, and put me more at risk of injury and more at risk of hurting myself and more at risk of having a bad competition day. So one protocol that I had, or that I instilled, was actually just over a year ago, and it was my last competition before the Olympics, and it was probably one of the worst periods that I'd experienced, because I mentioned that I had amenorrhea. I lost my period. It took a long time to come back. When it came back, I had this weird period where I was just trying to figure out what it was even like to menstruate, every period was different, and this particular one wasn't too far after that, and it was bad. It was so bad. So I got everything. I got the scattiness, the fatigue, the emotion,
the inflammation,
inflammation. And this is a couple of days before competition, and I just thought, oh my goodness, what do I do here? So I started listening to the psychological side of things. I knew physically there's not, other than take some anti-inflammatories, there's not actually a lot you can do a day or two before competition. So I started to address the psychological side of it and try to address the emotion and the fatigue and the tiredness that I was experiencing. And I did a lot of it. I took myself out of the competition setting completely, and I did a lot of meditation for like a full day. And I tried to bring my that fight or flight that I was experiencing down to a state of calm. And when I got to a state of calm, surprisingly, not surprisingly, all the inflammation started to feel a little bit better. I was a bit more mobile. I had a little bit more energy. So it was just an interesting experience, experiment for me.
And so with that being said, and competitions, is there ways to, and this is probably not healthy or recommended, but just out of interest, is there ways to manipulate your cycle to time it around competitions? Is that something that people try to do? Or because I know you can use contraception to, will take away your period, but can you do that to time it for training? Or tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a very it's a tough topic, because it's still done a lot. And I've heard, ever since I've started having these conversations, I've heard people just downstairs in the gym, just speaking really generally about it. Like, I was put on contraception at a young age because I was a swimmer, and it stopped my period, so I didn't have to stop trainings. And I'm like, there's a lot of red flags with that. And in a sense where, we're in the current day, when we're adults, women are still doing that for sport, but also for general training. And I think that's where the education really needs to come into play. So understanding that, there are different phases of your cycle. There's the follicular phase and the luteal phase, and then in between is ovulation, and estrogen and progesterone peak at different times during those phases. And then basically you take a pill that allows you to bleed. What happens when you are on contraception is those spikes just come to a really neutral state. So you're not getting those spikes. You're not getting that natural hormonal change it just kind of brings you to a state of neutral, and then you take a pill and it makes you bleed. But that's actually not necessarily an actual period. The bleeding comes from the shedding of the uterine lining, which means that you are going through those phases naturally, and then your body's getting ready to shed and to start a new phase, and that's when a period comes. So I think we fall into a trap where when we're taking contraception, we are creating a normal cycle by taking that little pill or, whatever it is. And we fall into a trap thinking that it's okay for us to just skip one here or there, because every time we do that, we're creating a new way of our body functioning. We're placing hormones where we want them versus letting our body do what it naturally needs to do. And I'm not saying there's anything right or wrong with that. I would just say that if you were to try and use contraception to manipulate your cycle to help your performance, you should have the education around that, knowing that it will have, for all the positives it might give you on that one particular day in your training going forward, it's probably counteracted by some negatives as well.
Yeah.
And so each individual needs to make that educated decision when they are skipping periods.
Based on the situation.
Yeah, based on the situation. And I have to say, in saying that as well, on the flip side, for someone who experiences really, really bad symptoms, maybe it is a good idea to do that, because maybe the symptoms are so bad. There are women who have such bad cramping that they can't actually stand up. So there are potentially benefits to that too, but it just comes back to making sure that you have the education before you make those decisions. Yeah, if that makes sense.
And so for an athlete out there that's just starting to kind of touch on the subject, and they're relatively new to high intensity exercise or competing or whatever it is, what would your recommendations be on how they can kind of prepare, get to know themselves better, and to set themselves up for success in the best way that they can?
Yeah, I think that one's a simpler one to answer.
Yeah.
It is get to know your body, get to know your cycle. There are heaps of apps now where you can track your cycle. So you literally just hit a button. So you open up the app and say, oh, today I've got cramps. I'm going to hit a button of cramps, and it'll just collect all that data for you.
Yeah.
Today I feel bloated. Today I feel super hungry. Today I'm fatigued. Today my bleeding started. And then you track the days of bleeding, and then it takes all of that data, and it'll just create over months of doing it, it'll create a rough indication of how long your cycle is, because that can range anywhere between 24 to 35-ish days. And so it'll create that average for you. And then you have all this data where you can go, okay, well, approximately on day 28, I get quite bad cramps. And approximately on day 2 is where I feel my most fatigued, or whatever it is, So understanding that about your body then allows you to build that confidence that I got to make some decisions with your training as to, if I feel really crappy this day, I'm not going to push it. And if it's test week, I don't care. I'm just going to, that's the day that I keep it lower intensity. But also it gives you the confidence to talk about that with someone. And I think this is, when it comes to communicating this type of stuff, I always say it's two-way. It's on you. It's on the responsibility for us as a female to know what's going on, to then be able to communicate it. And it's also on the coach to be able to receive it and not be like, oh my gosh, this is out. I don't want to talk about
Panic
this.
about it.
Just listen. Yeah. And I would say in that sense, for the coach to listen, you don't have to listen to the cycle side of it.
Yeah.
You just have to listen to the symptoms. Like, how would you coach someone who's got extreme fatigue? Because that's all it is.
Pull it back.
So,
yeah, it makes complete sense when you put it in, when you frame it like that. If you frame it under the symptoms of what you're experiencing, it makes it a lot easier for me as a male coach to say, I'm not going to tell you if you're super fatigued or if you were just experiencing muscle cramps from a completely unrelated reason. I'm not going to say, load it up, stop being a pussy, and work through it, work through it. You're going to understand, and you're going to go, you're empathetic and go, okay, cool, pull it back today, live to train another day. And like there's going to be more test week. There's going to be more training days. You don't need to kill yourself today in order to achieve a certain result right now. And so it makes 100% sense when you frame it like that. So good. And so with that, with females, and this is quite a common problem and problem that people talk about, is when they're in the period with fluctuating hormones and serotonin levels, that comes with a lot of cravings, intense cravings for either sweet or savory foods. We know that these cravings come from that often that fatigue that you're talking about as well. How do you combat this if you've got, say, performance goals or you're trying to maintain weight? Is there things that you try to change because you know when you're going to be like at what stage you are in your cycle? Can you plan for it and go, I know that I'm going to be craving foods at this time. Do I fight it? Do I prepare for it in a certain way by eating certain foods? What do you do?
Yeah, so I've made my protocols have come off from a little bit of educating around this, which is quite cool because I think it's a lot simpler than what we think.
Yeah.
I heard someone say who was actually doing this, she's doing her PhD on the menstrual cycle and women's physiology and training. And trying to make those connections. So she's doing that research, and she answered this question in a really simple way, which is great. When you are experiencing cravings, it's due to an increased metabolism with the spike of progesterone. So knowing that your metabolism increases and you genuinely are burning more calories during specific phases of your cycle, you just need to give yourself a little bit more energy. And I think because that happens at a specific time and it's so extreme so quickly, the cravings come from exactly that, is you're craving more energy. And I guess it makes sense that your body's craving carbohydrates and sugars because that's the most efficient form of getting energy in quickly. Yeah. So for me, hearing that and knowing that, I just told myself, okay, well, I'm just going to eat more, but knowing that I just need more fuel, I'm going to eat more of quality foods to help me because that's going to translate over into my performance. Because the bounce back of giving into all the cravings specifically and eating all the crappy food is everything that we know that comes with eating crappy food, is the inflammation and the sugar high and the sugar dump and all the extremes that come with it. So for me, knowing that, I just thought I'm going to eat more during this period of my cycle, knowing that I need more fuel. And if I do that well and right, it will mitigate the cravings or at least minimize them. And then I can truck on from there.
Yeah. Makes sense. And if you know that you've given yourself permission to be able to eat a little bit more and fuel yourself a little bit better with high quality stuff, and you're actually organized about it rather than getting to that point and then trying to fight it and restrict, which often just ends up in the adverse of what you're trying to achieve, which ends up in those blowouts and those you're unorganized, you grab whatever you can get your hands on versus this is going to happen. So I'm going to prepare for it and I'm going to fuel myself well and not beat myself up about consuming more than what I might normally do. So that makes a lot of sense. Megan, that was awesome. Thank you very much for your time. That was extremely insightful for myself as a coach, and I think for a lot of female athletes out there, they'll probably learned a bit as well. And I think a lot of male athletes, even just teammates, and there's a lot of like team competitions coming up. There's where you actually have to understand what's happening with the other half of your team, and male coaches, I think, will have got a lot out of that as well. And just opening up and normalizing that conversation about it all. So thank you very much for your time, and I'm looking forward to having you back on again sometime soon.
Thank you.